Good morning, everyone. My name is Aaron Mullaniff and I'm the Chief Services Officer with the NCBI. And today we are coming from UCD for our first ever Change This Space seminar. It is Monday, but I've no doubt it'll be one of the best mornings of your week, given the really exciting lineup that we have for you today. Some of our presenters are live and others are recorded via video link, given the dispersed locations of our speakers. With that said, you'll shortly hear from some incredible global leaders who are already essentially changing this space. We have the fabulous Caroline Casey from the Valuable 500. We have Jarnail, Chudge, co-founder of Microsoft Soundscape. We have Minnie, Baragwanath, Chief Possibility Officer, the Global Centre of Possibility in Auckland, New Zealand. And we have Chantelle Smith, National Access and Mobility Manager at NCBI's Possibility Lab. We will then conclude with our Change This Space Access Panelist Seminar, which will be moderated by the brilliant Bobby Hickey. And I just want to say at the outset, we have had an incredible response to Change This Space. On the link today, we have leaders from across government, we have leaders across local authorities, we've got tech, we've got healthcare, we've got disability, we've got access consultancies, engineering, healthcare. It's all there, and it's great to see, which also says a huge amount about the appetite for designing inclusive environments, and particularly for those who are blind and vision impaired. So why change this space? Simply put, the world, and indeed Ireland, is not designed for blind and vision impaired people, and we learn this every day at the NCBI. So I personally want to thank you all for showing up here today. It means a huge amount to everybody here. You're here because you have something to give, something to contribute, something to learn, or perhaps one decision that will really make a change that could lead to a much more inclusive environment for the 55,000 blind and vision impaired people that are living across Ireland. But to do this, we also need to recognise that there's still a number of critical success factors that we probably need to acknowledge, but that we won't solve today, but they should be mentioned at the outset from our prior learning. First of all, we need to really close the gap between what's written in policy and essentially what happens on the ground from an accessibility perspective. And NCBI too have a journey to go on here, and indeed a big role to play. Secondly, we need to recognise that some of us are still designing without blind in mind and with a minimum compliance mindset, which can be very, very, very damaging. And we also need to remember that we always have to be open and willing to learn from the person who we are designing for and with. And last of all, we also need to recognise that poor design is not just bad for blind and vision impaired people. It's bad for society, it's bad for everyone, it's bad for business. So what NCBI are going to do about this? So at NCBI, we've been using our strategy, which is titled Your Ambition, Our Mission. And essentially, we have been socializing the word possibility, a word that you're going to hear a huge amount about today, into our structures and into our systems. The possibility of a world where there are no physical or social barriers. The possibility of a world where blind and vision impaired people can participate equally in society, just like everybody else, and directly in line with our mission. At our strategy's core, we have two fundamental core concepts. The first one revolves around changing perceptions. That's changing perceptions around blindness and vision impairment, but also showcasing what's possible. Okay? The second concept looks at transforming in partnership, basically transforming with those who share our just cause. And if you don't mind, I just want to tell you a quick story. Just recently, NCBI, through its terrific partnership with Vision Sports Ireland, have been using sport to really promote and teach what inclusive attitudes look like. And particularly, we went out and designed a track day, of all things, which was aptly titled Zero Limits, whereby 80 blind and vision impaired people took to the Mondello track in County Kildare. Not just to potentially be spectators, they were driving. They were driving those cars, and they were driving very, very fast cars. On that day, one individual with no sight, but with huge ambition, drove at 121 kilometers an hour. And when he got out of that car, the sense of joy, the sense of freedom, the liberty, he said one thing to me: "Can you help me go faster?" And that has stuck with me ever since. And from the 80 blind and vision impaired people that took part that day, our oldest driver was a sprightly 86 years of age, and our youngest had just turned 13. And despite the age differential across all 80 drivers, they all shared the same ambition to do all the things that everyone else wants to do in an equitable and an inclusive society. And for many, they just never thought it would be possible. And there's that word again. See, not only were we successful at challenging perceptions around blindness, but doing it in a really positive light. We were only, and this is really important, we were only successful because we created those sporting life chances in partnership with a community that wanted to understand what was truly possible and were open and willing to work with us. Partners who are often responsible or have it within their gift, just like all of you on this call today, who are better positioned than charity, just like us, to design equity and inclusion into your programs, into your environments, into your services, into your policies, and into your initiatives. First time, every time. And often you just require a gentle steer from the NCBI. So at the outset of this seminar, and now that we've already made it possible for one blind man with huge ambition to drive 121 kilometers an hour, and possibly faster yet, who knows? What if we were all to consider a possibility mindset and take a similar approach to how we design inclusive environments to promote those life chances for the 55,000 blind and vision impaired people that are living across Ireland? But don't just hear it from me. Allow me to introduce Caroline Casey, who I'm so proud to have here today, the businesswoman and the activist behind the Valuable 500, the world's largest CEO collective and business move for disability inclusion. Caroline launched a movement at the World Economic Forum Davos Summit in 2019, and since then has signed up 500 multinational organizations with a combined revenue of over 8 trillion, employing 20 million people worldwide to radically transform the business system. The membership includes 36 of the FTSE 100 companies, 46 of the Fortune 500, and 28 of the Nikkei. Recently appointed the president of the International Agency for the Prevention of Blindness, Caroline also sits on several diversity and inclusion boards to include L'Oreal and Sky, and as we all know, is a much sought after speaker who has flown from New York to be with us here today. Caroline has received an honorary doctorate as well as multiple awards and accolades for her work as a disability activist. And as I welcome Caroline on stage, I want to remind everyone that there is an opportunity to ask questions by just using the chat function on Teams.
Well, here I am. Before we begin,
yes,
can we get rid of this? Seriously, because I'm going to fall into it. So
okay.
Is that okay?
That way?
This way?
That way?
This way. Yeah,
okay. Let's change this space.
Change the space immediately. Thank you for listening to Changing the Space. The most important thing when we're trying to change a space is to talk to the people who will be living and breathing and playing and learning and working in the space. I know that when we're on camera, the camera people would like me to stand still, and hence they wanted me to have a podium. But I'm a troublemaker by nature. I don't do as I'm told. So I just want to get rid of it because I don't read scripts. I don't write or prepare speeches. I just kind of come from my heart. And I was just listening to Aaron speaking about the driving in Mondello. And I'm going to end with my story about driving. But the minute I hear that, the stories about possibility and about being free to be who you are, I know why I'm standing in this space. Because often I don't feel that I have any expertise to speak as a disability activist because I have only one experience of disability. Or as the president of the International Agency for the Prevention of Blindness because I have only one experience of blindness. And who am I to be here speaking when we have incredible experts with Minnie and Jarnail coming and Chantelle? But that's the whole point, isn't it? As the issue around changing the space and possibility thinking and accessibility and inclusion is about every single one of us. It's about leaving nobody behind in the argument. It's not about a hierarchy of inclusion or who's blind enough or who's disabled enough to have this conversation. Every single one of us on this planet has a role to play in creating from impossible thinking to possible thinking. I mean, it's really emotional, actually, to come here today. 30 years ago, I graduated from UCD. I was hiding my sight, loss or my low vision. I have ocular albinism. I had discovered it at 17 years old, which, by the way, I'm going to be 51 in 3 days. So that's quite a lot. That's quite a lot of time ago. And it was just as I was beginning here in UCD where we're having this conversation. And I hid it because the world certainly then wasn't welcoming, nor was it designed for people who are visually impaired or people who have a disability. The really strange thing about that story 31 years ago is how I discovered that I was visually impaired was my father gave me a driving lesson for my birthday, which is, yeah, it's quite strange. But anyway, it's strange, but it also explains why I love the story about driving and freedom. When I left UCD in 1992, the idea that we would be even starting about setting up a possibility lab, it just would be unfathomable. And actually, when you think about, we're talking to Minnie later from New Zealand, from the center of global possibility. I mean, yeah, just for a moment. I know we've a long way to go. I know that. But look where we are today. And there's a lot wrong with our world. There really is. There's things that when you wake up in the morning and go, oh my God, I don't think there's another thing I can take. So what I'm going to say just today, can I ask you to open your heads and your hearts to all what we can do to move it from possible to probable. And that's about our heads and our hearts. I'm going to speak to you a few things today. I want to talk a little bit about the valuable 500 to prove that this change, by changing the space, not this room, not just our country, not just our boardrooms, but our society, is possible. It is changing. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the valuable 500. And I want to talk to every single one of you that has given your time to dial in and to be there. Even if you're holding a cup of tea, or even if the dog's barking in the background and you're dealing with the DHL, thank you for being here. And then lastly, I just want to end on my driving story, because for me, that is the absolute epitome of moving from impossible to possible. So just to start, head and heart, this issue around accessibility and inclusion. Some people used to frame it as, oh, it's all about people and the moral imperative and leaving nobody behind because we should have a place in the room. And that is absolutely true. Every single one of us, of the just under 8 billion people, need to have the freedom to belong, to be seen and to be heard as ourselves so we can contribute equally to society. It is our right. It is our right. And people think that I got involved in all of this work for lots of other complicated reasons. But what I really got involved in this work is to remove the barriers for any human being to be the person that they need to be. I have a beautiful nephew. And I remember when he was about 3 years old, I went down on my knees, and my sister will laugh, but I did go down on my knees because he was having a temper tantrum, as 3-year-olds are tend to do. And I put my hands on his shoulders and I was saying to him, Matthew, you're just perfect the way you are. But the thing is, the world isn't designed that way. It's not designed for everybody. But now we have the chance to be the architects, right? For Matthews in this world to grow up just as they want to be, every single person. And so there's the heart of what we do. So every one of you listening, if you close your eyes for a second, you know somebody who has a different lived experience of the world, whether it's visually impaired, whether it's blind, whether it's a disability. And yet, why is this issue always being left on the sidelines of society where we're begging and we're pleading, oh, please include us? Now, let me use the head version of what the reason for this is. Within our world, just today, 1.3 billion people live with a disability. And within that sight loss, with a mother and a father, that is 54% of our global economy. Let me just remind you, 54% of our global economy, that is 1 in 7 of us. That is anything between 15 to 20%. Let me just explain to you that the spending power alone of that group of people is 13 trillion. Let me also explain to you that by 2030, anything between 60 to 80% of our global population is going to hold 80% of the wealth. Yeah? Let me explain to you that different lived experience, disability, is the channel of innovation and insight that all of our companies in our world is dying to get. Let me remind you, the remote control was designed for blind people to watch television, and it's something that we all use. Let me remind you that SMS texting was designed for people who are deaf. This is not about charity. This is about our work, our world reaching its potential and its fulfillment. And COVID has blown that open. We are moving from the days of pleading with you and leading to say, help us include. We are moving from the days of making the business case, the case for inclusion of visually impaired people. We're talking about removing the blind spot, excuse the pun, but removing the blind spot, looking at all of this potential that's hidden away and making it work. Our world is complicated enough. Let me give you something else that terrifies me. Do you know, as the president of the International Agency for the Prevention of Blindness, our job is to remove. There are 1 billion people in the world who could see. Avoidable sight loss. 1 billion people are living with avoidable sight loss because they don't have access to care or glasses or cataracts. So it's our job today just to imagine what our role is in that. And so where we are today in speaking about how we can do that is to imagine what it's like to design accessibility as if we were talking about health and safety. The pandemic showed and proved that business can change in 17 days. Business that didn't have said, oh, it's just too complicated to employ people with disabilities or serve people with disabilities and their families as customers. And they were leaving, in the UK alone, are leaving because it is visually not accessible. 259 billion euro outside the door. Do you know that our FTSE 100 companies, 1/3 of them are not accessible? So that is just incredible when you think about it. So how can we do it? COVID showed that we can do it with intention. Accessibility is not simply the physical environment, the built ramps, and all the complicated things we see in our head. It's an intention to ask the people in the room. Because people who are visually impaired are living and breathing all around us. In COVID, we saw that when we began, that things like accommodations that we were always asking for as a disability community were everybody's needs. Everybody had accommodations. Everybody. And business were no longer saying, oh, man, that's too expensive, because business needed it. And because of that, we now see captioning on everything. I am so proud that the Irish Taoiseach was one of the first leaders in the world to have not only captioning, but to have interpreters. Do you know how many presidents of their countries did not have that? So how were they communicating with their deaf population? Right? So this is not rocket science. But this is about creating a space for all of you, whether you're in governments or whether you're architects or whether you're people with disabilities using your own voice or whether you're in business. The first thing to do is ask. How can we ask to make this better? And I think there's a lot of fear about getting it wrong, right? So when you're so worried about getting it wrong, you have a tendency not to ask because you feel ashamed. We have to remove all that. To get possibility thinking, we have to create safe environments for everybody to ask, to not to know. Because actually the intelligence is here. It's in the room and we know it. So to speak about the valuable 500, for me to tell you that you have the supports now in governments and you have the supports within leadership and you have the supports within society, but you've just got to use your voice and ask the questions. We've got to dial it up and collectively prove that this isn't just about something niche. This is not just about the visually impaired girl. And I want to give you an idea of where this can go so horribly wrong when we make assumptions. So the first rule is no assumptions. Do not make assumptions. What somebody like me needs. Myth. Number one, 15% of people who are registered blind have no vision at all, okay? People just think that blind is the thing, like we have seen nothing. Well, I have, you know your zoom lenses, we put blurry on it? I have about a foot vision. So the other myth is that everybody thinks that people who are blind or visually impaired use canes or have dogs. Well, actually, only 5% of people have a dog and only 2% use a cane. I do use a cane, and particularly in environments where I am just unsure. The thing is, don't make assumptions. The thing is, we need to bring the voice into the room. So let me tell you what the Valuable 500 was about. The Valuable 500 was acknowledging that disability had been on the sidelines for so long, that visual impairment was completely absent, and that there were people in our companies who were sight impaired, who had dyslexia, were maybe not speaking about it. We absolutely have proved from research that anything between 12 to 15% of our employees in governments and not-for-profits and in business have disabilities or low vision and are not speaking about it. Why? Well, that's because disability is always seen as the charitable thing or the worthy thing, or, well, we can't really do anything with it, forgetting about the insight and differentiation it offers around innovation and brands. Do you know that so many visually impaired people are part of making sure our digital innovations are just well and truly above the rest? Let's look at Steve Jobs for a second. And everybody always asks me, give me something to make the business case. I'm not going to give you the business case. I'm talking about one of the most, probably, I guess, one of the most famous CEOs in the world. Do you know what he wanted? The company Apple wanted to design beautiful products for everyone. So when that CEO said that, built into the way the company designs beautiful products for everyone is making sure that visually impaired people, people who are deaf, people of dexterity are part of the design team. But Steve Jobs was an outlier. He was the one that nobody really saw or listened to. Yes, they listened to him because, listen, it was the first company to trigger $1 trillion. But when we're talking about accessibility, it was built in, it was part of. And if there was ever a possibility thinker, that was Steve Jobs. And what did it prove? Well, cha-ching. So the Valuable 500 was trying to find 500 Steve Jobs because disability was on the sidelines. When we talked about inclusion, we talked about race and maybe LGBTQI and gender, but not disability. Because we were seen as being expensive, difficult, tricky, litigious. How do we change that? Leadership. And I've been asked to speak about leaders today. Leaders make choices and choices create culture. That is a quote from John Amachi. If you do not have leaders in the top of your governments or your business saying, I invest in this, I take responsibility for this, nothing will change. And I truly believe our society will continue to be excluding of people with disabilities and visually impaired people unless business is at the table. So, inclusive business creates inclusive societies. We now have 500. Aaron told you. What are we learning? As I'm coming to the end, I just want to give you some quick things about what you can do and what companies are doing. Did you know that we only have, out of Valuable 500, 6 chief accessibility officers? If they're not there, what are we going to do? Get somebody in your business to be responsible around accessibility. Make sure that they have the budget for that. Make sure that they have the access to the top. One thing that Salesforce did when it came into the Valuable 500, it appointed a chief accessibility officer. This is not something that you add in for something else. This is something that you build into your business. Number 2, as I said, don't make assumptions. Speak to the people in your business around you, whether in your not-for-profit or government or within the business itself. Ask people for their experience. Number 3 is go to organizations like the Possibility Lab or incredible swathes of accessibility organizations around the world. Be curious. Do not be afraid. Every tiny thing is a solution. So when I get off a plane in New York, as a visually impaired person with my cane, they shove me into a wheelchair. Why? My legs are working. Just ask me what I need. This is about opening our hearts and opening our minds. And that's exactly what you're doing today. And by joining it up and sharing our best practice, that's where we're going to trigger the change. Now, I want to end on one story because I have to. Because this is about our hearts. This is about all your hearts. You're future-proofing your world right now for you. If you are not living with a vision impairment, and if you're not living with sight loss, believe me, it's very likely you will at some point. So this is about us designing a world not just for ourselves, not just for our future, but for our children coming up with your hearts and minds. I see a wave, and I'm going to end. I did beat your friend, Aaron, in Mondello. Because in 2002, when I did a trip called Around the World in 80 Ways, always wanting to drive and never been able to, I got to race against a blind man on the Malaysian Grand Prix track. His name was Miles Sultan Barber. And I got to 192 kilometers an hour, 5 laps around the Malaysian Grand Prix track. So this is my question to you. Use your head and your heart and be curious. And if you want to move from impossible to possible, I've been inclined to think that impossible is a word with 2 letters that shouldn't be there. Because impossible, split apart, is I'm possible. I'm possible here because I had the chance for people to open doors, to listen to me, to let me troublemaker. You take everybody's hand, every opportunity that you can, and thank you so very much. I'm incredibly proud to be here with the NCBI and to be in Ireland today and to have the Possibility Lab open. Take care. Can I come across to you now?
You're going to have to. Take a seat. Don't tell me they put you in a wheelchair when you landed in New York.
Yes, they do it every time. And you know the hard part is I have to constantly then be the cross person and say, I don't need to use the wheelchair. I have a cane in my hand. And then it's embarrassing for them and it's embarrassing for me. But the point is, those wheelchairs are needed by other people. And I know because I travel all the time, there's not enough wheelchair use in Heathrow because people are using it when they don't need to. So just on a point of integrity, I will not get into a chair, not because I have any shame, but that's not what I need. And people who are deaf or blind in airports, it's so difficult. And actually, I think the best chance we could do is if we could design airports with all of our different experience, they could be the greatest example of what could happen in the world.
And with vision impairment being a hidden disability too, I have no doubt that the individuals who are wheeling you are also probably wondering what's going on, or wondering why they're doing it.
Well, I only had, I get quite emotional speaking about this because what am I? I'm 51 years old in 3 days' time. And I'm accused of not being disabled enough or not being blind enough. And I think people find it a compliment to say, oh, but you don't look blind. And I guess that's because, well, why is blind a bad thing? It's not. It's just part of who I am. And so I think there's a kind of reverse insult in it, not meaning to be, because the worst thing imaginable is to be blind. But it means that I have to come out every single time, right? And I love design. I am absolutely a lover of design. I love beauty. I love photography. But my God, the design of toilet signs now, I mean, it was bad when I was in UCD. Like, the only difference between a man and is like a triangle. I mean, I can't see a triangle from that away. And now they're getting real kind of avant-garde and swirly. I mean, I have to be honest, I'm really looking forward to having gender-neutral toilets everywhere because that will, I mean, I don't have to make the mistake.
And look, I think that is kind of the theme, and to what I was saying, the world is not designed, but it's simple things, you know. I'm conscious of time, and I want to get the most out of you that I can. We've hundreds of people online, and the guys, JP and Chantelle, have put some questions in here. Okay, and you were speaking to the piece around leadership accessibility in organisations, and you were talking about the chief accessibility officer and just 6 chief accessibility officers in existence. There's a question here, I think it relates to that. What does the tangible benefit look like? What has resulted in situations where organisations have embedded and have prioritised leadership accessibility?
Well, first of all, I think Jenny Leigh-Fleury, so we have Jarnail from Microsoft speaking. So Jenny Leigh-Fleury is the Chief Accessibility Officer of Microsoft. She reports directly into Satya Nadella, who is the global CEO, right? So her role is not somewhere tucked down underneath something in procurement or product. It's actually recognised as a strategic imperative to the business. And she is the best example that I can say of what happens when you have accessibility reporting in strategically into the leadership. Because look what's happening. Microsoft is differentiating itself through being accessible to all. And that is it. Like, you wouldn't have a Jarnail, you wouldn't have a Hector Minto. I can talk about all the people who are around the world. That is the difference. And that's why Salesforce, looking at their competitor, and put in a chief accessibility officer.
Fantastic. And again, I think it's the cultural piece that goes. If you're emphasising and you're putting that person in the role, and again, under Satya Nadella's leadership, he's a bellwether for learning and development as well. So they're always listening, always responding. And we even see it with the out-of-the-box accessibility in their products as well. Another question here. As part of your work with the valuable 500 companies, has any work been done around defining or quantifying the business value that can be gained by organisations as a result of inclusion of people with disabilities?
Look, I say this the whole time. Why are we making the case for human beings in business? I mean, seriously, business is designed for, with, by, we all work with it. I think that argument is over. I can give you the 13 trillion global spending. I can give you that if you want to serve that market, you need to have that talent in the business. I can give you that 12% of your employees currently have an invisible disability, most likely. I can tell you that you're leaving money to the side and innovation and different experience. Brands. You know, our CEOs are now more concerned about it's not even next gen anymore, it's Gen Z talent coming into their business. They are not going to work with a company to which is not inclusive for all. They have no interest in a la carte inclusion. So we can talk about that, but let me just say very clearly, the days for that are over. This is actually about a risk. This is no longer tolerated. So we're just on the inflection point of accessibility and inclusion is a human right. It always has been. But now we have the voice of a far younger, far more informed generation with digital accessibility and social media. It is not tolerated. This is about managing your risk now. So isn't that really interesting? In 3 years, we've moved from the business case to risk. So rather than being shaming though, how do we help not make this risk, but an opportunity for business to really to leverage on? So that's where it becomes exciting, right? And accessibility is probably the lead on inclusion. That's where we see the companies. And I have to say, there's one thing this demonstrates what you're talking about. At Mobile World Congress, which is one of the biggest business events in the world, we had Google, Apple, and Microsoft, all competitors, speaking on the stage about what? Accessibility.
And I think that piece to the opposite of risk, there's the reward.
Yeah.
And there's a question here, and it might be a tricky question, but is there one KPI that we can use or that you're aware of to define that return on investment? I know I'm putting it in monetary terms. It's a question that has been asked here.
No, keep asking the question. So first of all, we can give you the KPIs. What I do think, and I just quickly talk to you about, we need to ask our companies, our governments, to actually put KPIs into their business. It's one of the things the Valuable 500 are doing is how much are you financially investing in accessibility? You can't just say it. It's not nice, oh, we'll just have a nice person. It's not even good enough for you to have an accessibility person. How much money are you putting behind it?
And what does that look like for every euro or dollar invested to you? How much?
Well, that's a kind of tricky question. I'm not great at maths.
I'm getting tricky questions.
No, keep asking the tricky questions. Well, as far as I'm concerned, you should have inclusive budget across every function of your business, whether that's inclusive marketing, whether that's inclusive procurement, whether that's about products, whether that's about HR. But I'm going to give you a stat that'll help you.
Okay.
When Maltesers did their ad, right, and had somebody who was a wheelchair user, and it was really risky at the time, this is ages ago, their revenue to the bottom line tripled. It tripled. IKEA have done similarly the same. They won a can door in 2019 with democratizing their furniture to be inclusive. They similarly had a 999 uplift. So there are examples of them, but these are too piecemeal. They're like little kind of baubles on a Christmas tree. We want the whole Christmas tree to be inclusive, right? So we keep going back, the great Maltesers ad or the great IKEA piece. So we need to see an inclusive design function in every single part of the business. You need to be working with people with disabilities. If you want to get this right, because nobody's an expert in everything, you need to be talking to the NCBI, making sure they talk to your users. Because listen, you're here to help design that functionality into the business. So what the business needs is the permission of the CEO, the financial support of the CEO, train their line managers, because that's where it always gets caught. Train your line managers on disability awareness training or on visual impairment training. This is about knowledge, because when people have knowledge, then listen, nobody wants to keep anybody out of business. So it's about encouraging people to get into the room and giving them the information. So training budgets as well.
I have loads of questions.
Keep going. Give me the really tricky ones. I want the tricky questions.
The tricky ones, well, someone's asking here from the Valuable 500, who are the most accessible companies? Are you allowed to answer that question?
Oh my God, you can't make me pick my favourite.
But equally, on the other side of that...
Who is the shittiest? Oh, sorry, who's the worst? Sorry, I did behave very well.
We're definitely live. But again, yeah.
So I never name and shame, so I'm going to be really clear about that. I'll tell you why. I will never name and shame, because it's not a way I believe to make change happen. Where we would love to see more change is actually in the big construction industries, So it was brilliant for us when Arup joined, and actually that leadership came from Ireland. I just want to call that out. It was the Irish leader for Arup, which is a massive engineering construction company.
Right.
So what they wanted to do was to use all their clients to write white papers. I cannot deny, let's be honest, I say Apple, it is Apple. It is Apple. And I will also say we have Apple and Microsoft as iconic companies for our 500, helping our 500 lead the way. So if there's a question about there, rather than naming and shaming, we need to share best practice. And I think that's what the Possibility Lab is about coming. Look, you're hearing Minnie speaking about possibility from New Zealand, and you're hearing us speaking about possibility here. It's like that's when the contagion happens, when we start sharing the same things. My day when I know this is fixed is when companies are like this and they're going to compete on it. Like they audaciously compete on accessibility, then we know, or disability, then we know we've.
But it's going there, and
It is a
and
bit.
it should be seen as a competitive advantage and a
Yeah.
diversity piece too as well.
Well, it is. The smart companies are, the early adopters aren't. We still have a lot of lazy companies. Can I just be honest? I'm very proud of the 500, and we built it. We're the second biggest CEO coalition in the world after UN Global Compact. It began in Ireland, I'd like to say. But to get 500, we had to talk to 2,500. So we've a lot of work to do. So that's what I'm saying. Keep using your voice. Don't think your voice is too small to be part of this conversation.
I'm getting the 1 minute warning over there. Again, where there is low budget, what are the few easy things that a business can do to make a space or their business more accessible? And you may have touched on it in your presentation.
So if you're a small business, by the way, the valuable 500, 1,000 people up, the best practice happens in small companies because guess what? We treat our people like family. It is as simple as asking the people in your company to help any event. Is this good enough for you? The most important thing you can do as a company, just at the bottom of your email, say, we would like to communicate with you any way in which way we can. Will you please tell us? When you're running an event, when you send that email, what can we do better for you? Ask the question. And honestly, the information is there. Ask the question.
Caroline, we're out of time. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure having you here as well. And I'm going to introduce Jarnail Chudge, co-founder of Microsoft Soundscape, who's going to join us by video. Jarnail Chudge is a design and innovation architect in new experiences across group at Microsoft Technology and Research. Best known for the development of Microsoft Soundscape app, which NCBI partnered on. Jarnail will speak to the business case for accessible design, value of innovation, and the importance of co-design, providing practical examples of how this has contributed to the success of Microsoft Soundscape. Over to Jarnail.
Hello, my name is Jarnail Chudge, and I'm a design and innovation architect at Microsoft Technology and Research. As one of the co-founders of Soundscape, I'm delighted to be able to present at the Change This Space seminar organised by the NCBI. Over the course of the next 15-20 minutes or so, I provide an introduction to Soundscape, talk about its origins, how it started, and do a deeper dive into the process behind some of the design principles that drive the experience of Soundscape, and in particular some of the lessons and insights that we've learned along the way, including then the value and the impact of accessibility, and illustrating the journey that we've been on and we continue today from inclusive to universal. And in order to frame this, disability is often seen as a personal health condition, but we feel that actually if you look at disability as a mismatch between a person and the way in which they interact with their environment, task activities of everyday life, then that leads an opportunity to think about how technology can be an enabler in that regard. So what is Soundscape? We often describe it as a map or a navigation tool delivered in 3D audio. So what does that actually mean in practice? Fundamental to the Soundscape experience is, and we have it as our tagline, lighting up the world around you with sound. And we do this by having call-outs of objects, points of interest, landmarks in the environment around you, come from where they actually are in relation to you. So the call-out, as on this illustration of the Starbucks coffee, will come from either behind and to your right or behind and to your left, depending on where you are in relation to it. And importantly for Soundscape, we designed this so that the call out appears to come about a metre or so outside of your head, which allows us then to more accurately localize where it is in space, in the environment around us. And perhaps the best way to illustrate this is with a short video with my co-founder Amos Miller and our friend Emily.
Hello and welcome. We are going to demonstrate how I use Soundscape. I have my friend Emily here with me.
Hi there.
And my guide dog Trevor. You're going to hear and experience Soundscape in the same way that I do through these headsets. So let's go.
Facing north along 101st Avenue South.
So Emily, where should we go?
I heard there's a place called Local Burger nearby. Would you like to try it?
Let's do it. I'll set a beacon to it. Now I can hear the beacon over in front of us and to our right. That's where the Local Burger is.
Excellent. That beacon's really helpful as I can't see past these trees.
Fantastic. So let's go there.
All right.
Instead of step-by-step instructions, Soundscape lets me hear where the destination is so I can make my way there.
Main Street.
We're coming up to an intersection
Main Street
here.
goes right. Crossing.
Here's the crossing. Listen to the traffic. We're safe to cross?
All right, and it's safe to cross.
Do it. Hey, here's Fran's chocolate over there.
Oh, perfect. We should set a marker there on our way back.
Now I can hear the beacon loud and clear on my right, so we'll turn right.
Facing north along
And
Main
here
Street.
it comes right in front of us, so we know we're walking straight towards it.
Forum Plaza.
On Main Street and straight
Faster
towards the
rear later
beacon.
today.
We're going to start hearing it coming on our left as we get close to the Local Burger.
Joseph's Jewelry. Gilbert's on Main.
And
Beacon close by. I can see the door.
here we are. Fantastic. Emily, thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for listening.
Now, hopefully that provided you with a good overview of the fundamentals of what Soundscape is and how it works. And when we talk about the core capabilities, you'll have noticed in the video that fundamental to that was the use of an audio beacon as a way of being able to determine how you may wish to get from point A to point B. And of course, the way that Soundscape works, it places that virtual audio mark on where you want to go to as the crow flies. But of course, we're not going to be able to walk in a straight line to it. We have to deal with intersections and left turns and right turns, and so on and so forth. And with Soundscape, we provide information about upcoming intersections, about where things are in relation to you. And all the time, the sound of that audio beacon will guide you closer to it, but equally, depending on whether it's coming from the left or from the right or whether it's directly ahead, you'll have a good sense of thinking about when to turn right or when to turn left. And through this way, make your way independently to where it is you want to get to. And of course, in order to create this spatial audio experience, we require the use of stereo headphones. And over here, we've got a couple of examples on the slide of the Sony Link Buds, the AirPods Pro, which have head tracking sensors built in there, which allows us then to more accurately determine which way your head is facing and then place the call out more dynamically in that space around you. And of course, we know that lots of people prefer not to have something that goes inside or covers their ears. And the Shocks bone conduction headsets in that regard work really, really well. And some of the capabilities that I do want to call out, which have been particularly significant for us in Soundscape, is the ability for the person using Soundscape to be able to add markers, their own personalized markers, if you will, of space objects, any item in the environment around them. And then with that annotation, they can provide a level of description or definition that it makes it more useful, more relevant to them. And of course, they can then share that with somebody else. And the natural evolution in many ways of creating these markers was then the ability to be able to sequence them and collate them as a group and effectively create a route and be able to share that route with other people, for example. And we find that more and more people in the blind and low vision community, in the general population, orientation and mobility instructors, a whole range of different scenarios are using that very often. Some of the new capabilities that we've been working on with Soundscape over the last year or so is the virtual street preview, for example, which allows you from the comfort of your own home to be able to explore any part of the world. You can do a search, it'll place you at the nearest intersection of that landmark. Let's say it's Sydney Opera House. And from that intersection, you'll then be able to virtually explore what's around you just by turning your phone around. And in this way, remotely explore, discover, familiarize yourself with a space or a place that you're not familiar with. And secondly, I want to talk about the web-based authoring tool that is still in development. It's currently in preview, but which allows individuals, organizations, groups to be able to create guided tour experiences, scavenger hunts, and fundamentally use Soundscape in order to be able to create a trail, but then through the incorporation of audio files, images, detailed descriptions, really help to bring that space to life in a new, innovative, very immersive way. And this in turn has led us to think about a broad range of experiences that we've been working on. Some of those include working very closely with CRNA in the adaptive sports area, and they've created a whole host of experiences, particularly around trail orienteering, hiking, and have enjoyed enormous success in bringing those inclusive experiences to people with a range of different disabilities and so on. The tour guide experience is another one that naturally comes to mind. We recently completed a piece of work with St Albans High School for Girls, in which they created this historical heritage trail of St Albans and brought to life the Roman, the Victorian eras in a much more informative and engaging way. About a year or so ago in Skyview, which is a visitor attraction in Stockholm, we created this experience that allows the visitor from atop the gondola, where they have this amazing panoramic views of the Stockholm skyline, to be able to use sound to guide them to specific landmarks, and once they're facing in the right direction, to then virtually transport them there. For example, to the Royal Palace. While the changing of the guard ceremony is taking place, you can hear the sounds around you as if you're there. So as you can see, with Soundscape, in addition to the core and fundamental experience, we've also been able to extend those to a range of different environments and settings to showcase in many ways the broader value and potential of the technology. So how did we get involved? Where did this all start from? It started actually with a quest. In collaboration with the Guide Dogs organisation here in the UK, we looked at how technology could empower people to be more mobile and independent in a way that actually provides a better experience for everyone. And fundamental to that was a concept video that we produced. And in order to come to terms with how we wanted to convey that experience, on the next slide here, we carried out a huge amount of research, working very closely with people with sight loss, with orientation and mobility instructors, and learning firsthand from their own experience how they navigated spaces and places as they went to work, as they met up with a friend, as they enjoyed some time out together. And it was actually on a particular research visit that we paid to a part of London that was steeped in history. When Amos and I were reflecting on that, we recalled a fountain that we could hear but not always see. And that fountain is shown in the centre of the images on this particular slide. And we recognised that depending on where the sound of the fountain was coming from, we kind of always knew where we were in relation to it. depending on whether the sound was directly ahead of us or to the side or behind us. And in this way, it sort of anchored us. It allowed us to get a sense of our bearings. And that's where we really decided to think about using sound as a way of enhancing our appreciation, our awareness of the environment that we're in. And on this slide here, part of the process that we went through, in addition to carrying out these research visits and carrying out them with a number of times in a range of different settings and environments, we then basically had to think about how do we condense and collate all this information, and then working together, as shown on this slide here, with a number of people from across the Guide Dogs organisation, representing different disciplines, different areas of specialty and expertise, also naturally including people with sight loss themselves, orientation and mobility specialists, and along with colleagues at Microsoft from a design, from a technology, and from an overall strategy perspective, thinking about, well, okay, how do we turn these into stories that will allow us to bring this concept to life? So we scribbled endlessly. We went through a number of iterations, as you can imagine, before we started to really hone in on the core capabilities and the core aspects that we wanted to draw out as part of that. And on this slide here is a series of images from the concept video that we produced, which centered on Bill, the central character of the story, who's blind, organising a family day out. And through that day, dealing with things like travel disruption, having a picnic in the park with the rest of the family, doing some shopping, enjoying the exhibits at the Natural History Museum, and so on. And on this next slide here, fundamental to what we were trying to incorporate and reflect in the experience was, how do we keep the soul of that experience intact all the way through, so that the experience feels empowering, truly empowering to the individual. And for us as designers, it was critical that we sort of do everything that we could to understand the experience of a person who wasn't us. Hence working very closely with mobility and orientation specialists, looking at the way that they worked with clients, having the opportunity to observe and participate in some of these training and learning sessions ourselves, doing as much of an immersion as we possibly could. And one of the artifacts that we produced, shown on the bottom picture here, was this enormous flowchart, which is about 10 meters long and a meter high, which mapped out every single step of the scenario in a range of different environments, thinking about it from the perspective of the end user. What was going on around them? What was their particular aim or objective that they had in mind? The considerations of using a cane versus a guide dog, how to navigate your way through busy places and so on. And through these dimensions, it helped us to get a much better grasp of what was really important to the person as part of that experience. But what equally mattered was not just producing the concept video, but actually demonstrating the technology itself capable of coming together in a way that created this virtual soundscape experience around a person. And this was back in 2012, so 10 years ago. And as you can see, the very rough and ready hack that we produced consisted of a big pair of gamer headphones, to which we attached some sensors at the top, which allowed us to track which way the person was facing. Those sensors were then integrated into a PCB, a printed circuit board that we put inside a metallic biscuit tin, which was then tethered to another person holding a laptop. So far from portable, far from scalable, but nonetheless, through hacking together these different components and bringing together information about the environment around you, we were able to create a 3D spatial soundscape around a person. And that gave us the confidence that the technology itself did have legs. And as part of the journey that we went through, we looked at how a person would be able to travel independently. Taking a typical example of leaving home, walking a few hundred yards to a bus stop, travelling on that bus, making your way through a busy town centre, for example, using public transport, and so on. And as we created that through the initial prototypes and the technology demonstrators, we worked very closely with guide dogs researchers in order to be able to validate that across a series of mobility measurements that allowed them to evaluate the technology. And of the 17 measures around mobility that they had, we found that 10 of those 17 measures were significantly enhanced by providing these spatialized 3D audio call-outs to a person as they were making their way through the environment. And thankfully, none of the remaining 7 were diminished or compromised in any way. But what really made us sit up and take notice was some of the subjective, some of the verbatim feedback from the people that we were working with. In addition to being able to experience the environment in a way that they had never really experienced before by having access to all of these call-outs of the environment around them, it was noticed by the mobility instructors in particular that a person's gait was more purposeful, that their body posture was more upright, and they themselves and the end users themselves said that it actually made them feel more connected to these spaces and places that they were going through. It made them feel more present, and that we thought was, gosh, that's really the difference that Soundscape is making here. And how do we do this in a way that feels ultimately truly empowering? Because we recognize that all we had done in many ways was to take the existing paradigm of largely turn-by-turn information, step-by-step instructions, and then added an additional layer of spatial audio information to enhance their appreciation of the environment. But nonetheless, a person, when they're told to turn left in 20 meters, they'll immediately start thinking 20 meters, that's approximately 30 steps, let's say, and inwardly they'll start counting those steps. And some of that attention will naturally go towards counting those steps. And instead, what we wanted to do was look at how we could be more expansive in our thinking. And that's when we made this fundamental shift to go from providing very prescriptive information, which can lead to a heads down experience, to providing more descriptive information, which allowed a person then to naturally build up a much more intuitive and personalized picture of the space around them, their own mental map, if you will. And instead of thinking about this sort of fine-grained turn-by-turn navigation, we turned our attention to a much more coarse-grained navigation, the ability to be able to set an audio beacon where you want to go. Instead of being told turn by turn, you know that it's over there to the left, slightly ahead of you, therefore you start walking forward, and you know that you've got to think about turning left because that's where the sound is guiding you. And of course you'll have the intersection called out spatially. You'll be able to stop and orientate yourself, know where the sound is coming from, and in this way travel more independently and more autonomously. And we often describe Soundscape in this regard as an audio display that enriches your experience and your understanding and appreciation of your surroundings, ultimately leading to an experience which is more heads up, in which you're more engaged and more attentive to whatever else is going on around you. And of course, this leads to opening up and changing the spaces and places for everyone in a way that has the opportunity, has the potential to be truly empowering, whether that's enjoying, discovering a place that you're not familiar with, sharing more detailed guidance or information with another person, ultimately being able to travel on your own terms, having choice to choose how you get from one place to another place. And in many ways, This, I think, also goes to demonstrate that when looked at through this sort of particular lens of inclusive design, that accessibility can be seen as both a responsibility and as an opportunity. We certainly know that from a responsibility point of view, that there are compliance-related requirements and obligations that we have to adhere to and abide with. But equally, it provides an opportunity. It really brings to life the fact that inclusion matters. And in some research that was carried out by Accenture a couple of years ago, we know that there are over 1 billion people in the world with a range of different disabilities, many of whom would benefit from different assistive technology solutions. However, only 1 in 10 have access to the products that they need. And that's a massive gap. But we've also seen through this research that inclusive organizations outperform their peers in terms of increasing in revenue, better net income, higher profit margins. But perhaps equally importantly, from a sustainability perspective, it also helps to attract top talent. And if you look at millennials, the next generation of workforce, certainly by 2025, they actually choose employers who reflect their values. And diversity and inclusion is right at the top of that list. One of the things that we've certainly learned through Soundscape and at Microsoft is the importance of how it's helping us evolve product and service design. And on this slide here, the most important thing is to start and end with the human experience. Get out into the real world, embrace that diversity and be open to new ways of looking at and engaging with that world. And particularly, there's the opportunity to align that with a sense of purpose, a sense of making a difference. Then that motivation to continue to go just naturally presents itself, and to iterate and come up with ideas, explore them with people, develop a thick skin to take on board that feedback and change and evolve your thinking in tune with that. And of course, we've seen time and time again a whole host of innovations that come from dealing with extreme constraints, and ultimately how sometimes when we embrace that constraint, that designing for that 1% actually drives innovation for everybody. And we've seen great examples of the telephone, the typewriter, the internet, highly advanced technology to do with the space mission, all came out of a need of dealing with a range of disabilities, whether it's blindness or deafness or restricted mobility. And we hope in many ways that Soundscape too is able to play a part in demonstrating how a hands-free and heads-up experience for everyone is really an opportunity that allows us to engage with the space around us in a far more meaningful way. So instead of walking around as we often do with our heads buried in our phones, not paying attention to what's going on around us or the people that we're with, how this technology is enabling everyone to be more heads up, to be more present, and to be more engaged. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jarnail. It's really interesting to learn what's happening from a mobility innovation perspective. And look, I think we all have time to grab a cuppa now, but whilst you're doing that, let me introduce to you Minnie Baragwanath, the Chief Possibility Officer from the Global Centre of Possibility in Auckland, New Zealand. Minnie will be introducing the possibility lens to Ireland today and discussing the inaccessibility of the current status quo. She will also discuss the opportunities around designing with people, talent and opportunity to promote accessibility under a design with approach. Minnie's work and study as an access innovator and as a social entrepreneur extends over 25 years, as included many diverse roles and accolades, including receiving New Zealand Order of Merit, the Sir Peter Blake Leadership Award, the Westpac Woman of Influence Diversity Award and the Zonta Women's Award, and was placed as a top 10 finalist for the Kiwi Bank New Zealander of the Year. Over to you, Minnie.
Kia ora, and thank you so much for the opportunity to join you all here. As I've just received such a beautiful introduction, just to reiterate, my name is Minnie Baragwanath, and I work as an independent global consultant on accessibility with individuals, organisations and communities. And I also have the great privilege of being the founder and the Chief Possibility Officer at the aptly named Global Centre of Possibility here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. It really is a privilege to be here with you all at such an innovative and progressive event. It fills me with hope at the recognition, I guess, that this theme of possibility is a global concept that I believe is starting to take traction. And I'm very much hoping that everyone here today will walk away from today, if not already a pioneer of possibility, certainly a convert to possibility, because it's a very exciting space to be a part of. So today I'm wanting to share with you my thoughts on how we design and create and lead a future of possibility. The first thing that I want to establish, I guess, when thinking about the world through that perspective is the fact that access citizens, disabled people, people with disability, whatever the language is that you might use, we're nothing new. As long as there's been life on planet Earth, there have been people living with some kind of an impairment or access need. And yet, here we are in 2022, still grappling with the fundamentals of how to create a truly equitable, fair, and progressive society. So what's going on? Today, in 2022, the figures around the world are quite similar. And you might have already heard some of these already today, but I think it doesn't hurt to reiterate the fact that between 20 and 25% of us live with some kind of an impairment or disability or access need, as I tend to call it. 30% of millennials have some kind of access need or impairment. 50% of us, by the time we're 65, will be living with some kind of impairment, whether it's due to a congenital condition, accident, illness, or the biggest cause of all, aging. And of course, we are entering a stage in our human story with an unprecedented number of older people on the planet. Accessibility, disability, whatever you want to call it, is a part of being human. So one of the critical things and one of the critical shifts I believe we need to make if we're starting to look at the world through a lens of possibility, we have to let go of this binary mindset. We've got to stop thinking about us and them. It's time we embraced the concept of a continuum, a constellation, the fact that access and accessibility and the experience of living with some kind of an impairment will happen to all of us if we live long enough at some stage in our lives. So letting go of the binary is absolutely fundamental. What I am hoping to share with you today, and to expand on the amazing presentations I know you've already had this morning, is the idea of a 21st century approach to accessibility. I think sometimes we don't even question. I think we sometimes think there's just one approach. Accessibility or disability is just how it is. In my mind, it's actually something we've constructed as humans. We have the potential to reframe the world around us and how we see people, how we see ourselves, our brothers, our sisters, our mothers, our fathers, our children, our grandparents, our future generations. Do we want to look at them through an old-fashioned lens that places limits, that looks at us as broken or somehow inferior? Or do we want to look at our access citizens as full of limitless human potential? I know which lens I'd rather be looking at the world through, and that is the world of possibility. Fundamentally, the world of possibility is a contemporary 21st century approach to looking at the world around us. And it's absolutely essential that we start to embrace this concept of possibility design and innovation. And I'll speak into that and what that means in a little more detail in just a moment. First of all, I need to come out as a blind person myself. I was born with a sight condition that meant by the age, in my early adolescence, my sight started to deteriorate quite rapidly. By the age of 14, nearly 15, I was diagnosed with a sight condition, which means I have no vision in the centre of both my eyes. I can't read a book, I can't drive a car, well, not yet, who knows, with automated vehicles, that might be a possibility, but right now it's highly illegal in New Zealand, and I imagine in other parts of the world too. And I live a very full and interesting life. I've managed to have the great opportunity to be the CEO and founder of 2 organisations, and I like to think that I've hopefully contributed to the world around me in a variety of ways. However, my experience as a blind woman is inescapable, and I want to share with you some of my experiences just briefly, which hopefully convey to you why it is that I think we're at a really critical juncture right now in our human story, not just here today with the conference that we're all attending, but actually in 2022, I believe we're at a critical point in the world and around the globe in terms of how we decide to go forward. Do we want to create an accessible future for our more than 2 billion access citizens worldwide? Or don't we? And as designers, leaders, innovators, policymakers, planners, that future actually lies within our hands. It lies within every single design choice we make, whether it's about the economy, the built environment, education, employment, industrial design, how we show up together as humans with each other. That choice lies with each and every one of us. And I hope that by the end of this session, you're choosing possibility along with the rest of us. So why is it critical? Why right now? Well, for myself, 7 years ago, I had a truly shocking diagnosis. I went to my first mammogram appointment, not expecting to find that there was anything wrong, like probably millions of women every day around the world, only to find out that I had advanced breast cancer. This is a shocking diagnosis for anyone at any point in their life. And it was truly astounding when this diagnosis came my way. At the time, I was running a multi-million-dollar social change organisation. I was all about the future. I was all about social change. It never occurred to me for one moment that I was about to have my world utterly tipped on its head. The thing to remember is that blind people, people with access citizens, encounter and interact with every part of our society. And what I was about to discover in the most brutal way was just how inaccessible our health system actually is here in New Zealand. This became immediately apparent when I was given my diagnosis by a very gorgeous doctor, who then handed me a large folder full of printed information, critical information about the services, the support, the phone numbers, everything I would need as a woman with a fresh cancer diagnosis to navigate the health system. I remember looking at this folder in bewilderment and just thinking, this is of absolutely no use to me. As I said earlier, I cannot read the printed word. And I said to him at the time, is this available in an electronic format? No, was his answer. Now, this might have changed 7 years on, but I wouldn't count on it. And certainly for people all around the world, I would say most health systems right now are not at a point where they have digital information available for every health condition. So the stakes were suddenly very, very high for me. This was about my life. This was now a life and death design scenario. No one had thought to design our health system with blind people, with disabled people, ironically, at the heart of it. I went on to then have one of the most complex years of my life with multiple unfortunate health conditions and medical misadventure that occurred along the way. At one point, I think throughout that next 12 months, I had more than 50 appointments with various parts of the health system. I ended up with pneumonia, massive infection, blood clots, radiation treatment, and repeated visits to different parts of the health system. Not one appointment came to me in a form that I could read. It was a scheduling nightmare. My medication came to me in tiny bottles that I simply could not read. At one stage, I had 10 different forms of medication lined up beside my bed. I used to count where my pills were, how many I'd taken, and insist on keeping all my medication lined up in a way that I knew which container I had to remove a pill from at which point in the day. So the reason I share that story is this is about design. This is about who we value when we make design decisions. And this is about the extraordinary consequences when we do not design with accessibility and possibility at the forefront of our minds. So what I want to share within this possibility worldview is that the status quo, the way the world is today, is not benign. It's not some neutral position. The status quo, if we continue to design the world in the way that we design currently, it is deeply harmful for thousands, if not millions, of people every day in our world. So if we continue to design and make decisions about the world around us using the paradigms we've used up till now, we are designing people out of our health system, our economy, our environment. We're designing people out of being able to contribute and bring their fullest selves to our world. Is that the world we want? I can tell you it's not the world I want. And I will do everything in my power, as long as I live, to try and invite others like your gorgeous selves to reimagine a different potential future. The second scenario I want to quickly share with you, I think many of you will recognize the slide that's now come up on your screen, scooters. I don't know if you've got them in Ireland and other parts of the world, but shortly after I'd been through this crazy health system scenario, I re-emerged finally, battered and bruised, back onto the streets of Auckland, only to be nearly struck down by one of these incredibly fast-moving scooters that had suddenly been given the go-ahead as a pilot to appear on the streets of Auckland. Who decided we needed scooters on our footpaths? Who made that decision? And what was the decision-making framework that sat behind that decision? Who were we thinking about when we decided we needed scooters on the one part of our built infrastructure that for many people living with an impairment is a sanctuary and a place of refuge that enables us to get from our home to a bus stop, to get from our home maybe to a taxi, to get from our home to our pharmacy, to the local convenience store, whatever it might be, without fear of being knocked over. So this for me raises the question about who are we designing for? I ended up in an incredibly heated debate with a dear friend of mine who was defending the scooter, saying we need them. And I was like, why do we need them? This friend of mine has a Land Rover, a Vespa, access to buses, trains, he can walk, and now he has access to a scooter as well. He is what I call a transport have. For me, my major forms of transport are either my legs, I walk everywhere as much as I can, or I tend to get a taxi. If we give permission for something like scooters on our footpaths and we don't think about the true diversity of our population, what are those unintended consequences for someone like myself and the hundreds and thousands of other people who rely on the footpaths as a place of sanctuary to get around? I'm not saying we shouldn't look at innovative solutions to our transport problems. We absolutely should be. But we need to think more inclusively about how those decisions will impact, who those decisions will impact on, and what is this future society we collectively want to create. Because I don't think we're thinking this through very well at the moment. And the third reason why I think we're at a critical point where we must shift to a possibility mindset is the reality is that we're now living in what many people call a VUCA world. VUCA is a fabulous acronym, love a good acronym, stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. We're living in a world where change is happening at the most rapid pace in an unprecedented rate. A lot of this has to do with the fact that technology has meant things are happening faster to us as humans than ever before. We're more globally connected. Social media, all these technology platforms that we have for sharing information, ideas, new innovation are impacting us in a most remarkable way. We can almost hardly keep up with the change. We're dealing with the impact of artificial intelligence, cryptocurrency. We've got crazy warfare going on in the world. We've got, of course, pandemics, as we all know, as we've all just lived through and are still living through the effect of COVID, which has affected us in the most extraordinary way, impacting our supply chains, our food security. Our economy has been turned on its head. So this world we're living in is changing at the most incredibly rapid pace. My question is, though, who's thinking about the impact of all of this on the 25% of us who live with an access need? Is anyone thinking about this? Because there is both incredible risk and incredible unprecedented opportunity if we pay attention, if we're front-footing our design decisions about an accessible future, if we pay attention to some of these extraordinary innovations that are coming down the pipeline from the future towards us. The risk, however, is if we're not thinking about these future impacts, people with access needs could be further designed out, not about just our health system and our transport, our economies, but out of so many areas of our world, out of our technology, out of our digital future. Remember what I said at the beginning? The status quo is not benign. Unless we design access into everything, unless we're deeply intentional, we will not have an accessible future. The default setting is not benign. It's not a neutral setting. If we want an accessible future full of possibility, if we want to harness the future of AI, cryptocurrency, climate change, how that affects all of us, including our access community, we need to be front-footing and exploring what opportunity do these and other future innovations open up to us. I can tell you firsthand that during COVID, of course, all of our lives were turned upside down. But as a blind woman who lives alone in New Zealand, the impact was truly profound. The first thing that happened was all information moved digitally online. All my old techniques of being able to walk around my neighbourhood, ask for help, talk to my neighbours, talk to my local convenience store, do my shopping, was suddenly made impossible. Everything relied on my ability to use the digital environment. Now, I have an okay capacity for using the digital environment, but I am not massively digitally skilled. And a lot of my technology is very second rate. The very website that provided all the critical information we needed to know about accessibility during COVID here in New Zealand for the first month or two was not accessible to the blind community. It had not been designed in a way that ensured the blind community could log on and find out every bit of critical information we needed to know. And I could go on about it, but all of a sudden I realized as this whole world moved digitally, on one hand, this could have been a remarkable opening up of the world, but it assumed that every part of the digital structure, the environment, the digital environment, including my technology, was accessible. Well, guess what? It wasn't. If we'd been planning for a pandemic, if we'd been planning well about these future trends, if we hadn't been so caught up in today, in survival mode, perhaps someone would have come up with an innovative solution that wouldn't have meant I was further designed out during COVID than many other people. So this is why I think we need to reimagine. This is why we need a different way of thinking about the future and the world we can and could create. And this is where the idea of possibility emerged for me. Being the social innovator, the entrepreneur, the problem solver that I am, all those things are going on, but I can't just sit there and be overwhelmed by them. I have moments of being overwhelmed, but then my brain starts to kick into gear and I'm like, what do we need to be doing differently? What are we missing here? Why in 2022 are we still grappling with these issues? Well, the reason is the world keeps changing, but the way we think about access doesn't seem to change and evolve at the same rate. So what if we came up with a way of thinking about the world that was truly contemporary, truly 21st century? This is the world of possibility. Now, on your screen, you'll see a slide that is a spectrum called the possibility spectrum. At one end, we have a disability worldview. In the middle, we have an accessibility worldview. And down the far end, we have what we call the possibility worldview. If we go to the next slide, what do these worldviews mean and why are they important? In my mind, disability is all about compliance. It's an old-fashioned worldview. Now, I'm not saying the word disability is a problem. It's a way of looking at the world. And I think it's the way that if we even think about design, decision-making as leaders in the built environment or in the digital environment, I think unconsciously many of us are coming from this place of a deficit worldview. We think of disabled people as broken, as problems that need to be fixed. We think of designing to people. We don't design with people on the whole. It's all about compliance, minimum standards and tick boxes. I don't know if this is resonating with people. When I worked in local government, though, this was very much the mindset. People were always looking at how much they could get away with. What was the minimum they could get away with? I mean, that is an appalling mindset. And in my mind, that is an incredibly outmoded, outdated, and quite a dangerous mindset, actually. Yet, I think it's where most organisations and most people are unconsciously still living in the disability worldview. Well, I'm hoping after today, everyone makes a commitment to leave that worldview. At the very minimum, we need to be operating within what I call the accessibility worldview. In the accessibility worldview, we understand that there is a concept of equality. We understand that there is such a thing as a level playing field, and we're striving to reach it. We might not always know how, we may not always get it right. We probably won't. We're very focused on what are the access challenges of today's world, and that is a truly admirable place to be operating. The organisation I set up about 13 years ago in New Zealand called Be Accessible operates in this worldview. It goes in and it works alongside organisations who want to understand how they can be a good employer, how they can serve their customers well in today's world. And there's a huge amount of work that can go on in that space. But in my mind, neither of those approaches offer what the world of possibility can offer. The world of possibility always has an eye on the future. The world of possibility understands we have to design with the access community at the heart of all of our design decisions. We understand that accessibility and access citizens and access pioneers bring a way of looking at the world that challenges the status quo, and we need to embrace and support and nurture those innovators, those designers, those thinkers, those leaders. We need to open up the world of design and planning to people who bring a fresh perspective. This worldview is not about inclusion. It's about actually the access community inviting others to come along with us to reimagine a future state of what's possible. It's about innovation. It's not about compliance. It's about generative thinking and going beyond what we ever imagined was possible in the world today. Now, I want to give you an example because I know that might sound all very lovely, but a little bit airy-fairy, especially some of the planners out there and the engineers. I know you'll be looking for something substantial. So I'm hoping that this example gives you something substantial. I had the great fortune of meeting the most gorgeous young access innovator and entrepreneur a couple of years ago called Arash. Arash immigrated from Iran to New Zealand. He himself was born with dyslexia, and his mother brought him to New Zealand in the hope that he could have access to a really equitable future, thinking that New Zealand could offer a fairer society for a young person with an access need to grow up in. He was studying engineering at university and doing some really remarkable work with artificial intelligence. One day he woke up and he had gone deaf in one ear. He soon discovered that he had a condition, which means he will probably go deaf completely within the next few years. As an incredibly agile, purposeful, amazing young man, full of energy and a sense of potential and yes, possibility, he couldn't accept that somehow his life would be less than his hearing friends. He looked at the issue of access to education as he went about his university studies and thought, well, how on earth will I access university education and employment if I'm deaf? And he thought about the fact that we have sign language interpreters. And he soon became aware that there was this huge shortage of sign language interpreters. And also there's a huge cost around having sign language interpreters. Being this incredible innovator, he thought, well, is there a different way of looking at the issue, the challenge of today? The challenge being we have deaf people, amazing deaf people full of potential, but their only access right now to education and employment is through human sign language interpreters. He set about creating an avatar. He used the latest in artificial intelligence to come up with an avatar that does sign language. He's now set up the most extraordinary business, employing other deaf people as specialists alongside other people who are hearing, who bring other design and innovation skills together, and with each other together under his leadership and guidance as a 21st century progressive access innovator and entrepreneur. He is utterly transforming the future for deaf people around the world. That is possibility, innovation, and design in action. It's kind of that simple. But what it requires is for us to make an investment into innovation, research, and development. If we don't make that investment into possibility, innovation, if we don't make that investment into entrepreneurs and innovators who live with this access needs and disability, Soundscape is a perfect example of possibility, design, and innovation that you've heard of already this morning. We're going to miss out on innovations that could absolutely transform the future for access citizens in years and generations to come. If we invest into possibility, we could actually create a legacy that could ensure for the first time ever in human history that people living with a disability who are blind with an access need can not only live full lives, have access to the world around them, but could contribute to the world through their diverse experience and way of experiencing in an utterly unprecedented way. As you'll see from this slide, possibility leadership, which is what we're actually talking about today, is the ability not only to reimagine, but to also to create a future beyond the limiting paradigms of disability and accessibility to create a truly equitable future world. What the possibility lens and worldview shows us is there is more than one way to think about an accessible future. And if we're truly interested in creating an accessible future, we must let go of our old-fashioned, outmoded ways of thinking. We must update our mindset, our lens. Literally, we need to look, says the blind woman, at the world through fresh eyes and embrace the unprecedented opportunity that lies before us. Now, beneath all of this actually sits years of research and innovation. We spent 3-4 years developing an entirely new approach to designing, leading and innovating through possibility, which unfortunately I don't have time to go into here, but perhaps we can have another opportunity at some stage to do that together. But if there's one other word I want you to take from my session today, it's the word with. Disability is when we design to the access community. Accessibility is when we design for. Both of those are quite paternalistic approaches. I want to invite a conversation, a future where we truly design with the brave pioneers of a different future, one that is truly full of possibility. Thank you so much for your time today. I hope that's generated some thought, some discussion. You can contact me directly, and I'm sure through the Change the Space website, you can also be in touch. I would really love to talk further with you and together explore what we can create as pioneers of possibility. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Minnie, for that really thought-provoking presentation. You've certainly challenged my thinking and even my approach, and I'm pretty sure that many people on the call today are feeling the same way. So before I introduce Chantelle Smith to tell you about the advent of the Possibility Lab, I want to give you a little bit of background. So for 90 years, NCBI have been largely focused on preparing blind and vision impaired people for the world. And then we realised when COVID struck, we were missing something really important. We needed not only to prepare blind and vision impaired people for the world, but also to prepare the world for blindness and vision impairment. And thus, the Possibility Lab was born, which has been launched today in parallel with Change This Space. So our next speaker is Chantelle Smith, who is a co-founder of the NCBI Possibility Lab. Chantelle has extensive international experience working as an orientation and mobility specialist, as an access consultant for over a decade. Her interests include accessibility to the built environment, mobility innovation, and service development. Chantelle is currently working across a number of projects which aim to increase safe access to public transportation and the urban realm for individuals with vision impairment and other access needs. So over to you now, Chantelle.
Thank you, Bobby, for the introduction. Hello, and thank you for joining us virtually today. I am Chantelle Smith, NCBI's Access and Mobility Manager. Today, to mark the launch of NCBI's Possibility Lab, we have brought together top international and national experts to discuss the importance of inclusive design in the built environment and how this work across industry will transform the lives of generations of people who are blind or vision impaired in Ireland. It's an extraordinary honour to follow up after Caroline, Jarnail and Minnie. In the last 12 months, a dedicated team of access and mobility specialists have been laying the foundations for the NCBI's Possibility Lab, an ambitious initiative that provides bespoke training and access consultancy to businesses and organisations across Ireland to enable their leaders and staff to identify and understand the needs of individuals with sight loss, addressing the barriers that they face every single day and innovating in a way that is making mobility easier in rapidly changing environments. So why the need for the Possibility Lab? Well, in the same 12 months, we've had in excess of 500 requests from business leaders and industry professionals like yourselves, seeking design advice, most commonly because the minimum design standards that relate to vision impairment are insufficiently detailed. In fact, 46% of our service users report being injured in a public place on multiple occasions, and 27% reported that they would never travel to an unfamiliar place independently. We must start to use dependable indicators for accessibility and measure journeys not made and journeys not completed. We must be bold enough to ask what is possible and, in Minnie's words, not accept the status quo. We must move beyond the current mobility reductionist approach to total mobility and away from an over-reliance on universal access policy, which suppresses and overlooks the experiences of people with vision impairment. The Possibility Lab goes beyond what is deemed adequate and provides bespoke solutions which empower users to take daily journeys with confidence, providing advice on how to bake in accessibility and genuine, inclusive co-design processes across the lifespan of projects and developments. Today, we have over 300 registered for the event. These delegates come from county councils across the seas, the HSC, healthcare, sport, industry professionals, engineering, architecture, access, technology, as well as academics and future mobility organisations. We call on each of you to commit to implementing and adhering to the overarching principles of the seminar, demonstrating your commitment to designing a world which is prepared for people who are blind or vision impaired, so that they too can move freely and connect with the environment. On our webpage is the start of NCBI's Living Library, an opportunity to hear the stories of people who are blind or vision impaired, recounting both the catastrophes and triumphs in the built environment. Stories of spaces that by design are unconquerable or designed for lives well lived. Collectively, these stories matter, and for every story there is a lesson or a solution that can be implemented to improve the lives of people who are blind or vision impaired. The reality is that small everyday decision-making in the built environment leads to profound change over time. As part of this seminar, we are doing a deep dive on the key areas which by design can easily enhance accessibility for those with sight loss. Our access panellists very shortly will share how best practice can maximise usability and connect people with place. The key areas relate to how people with sight loss access information in the built environment across the whole journey, premises and infrastructure. We explored journey planning and the importance of having a complete set of information when preparing for a journey so that one has the confidence to set out on the trip in its entirety. We consider the critical need for accessible pedestrian signals to facilitate safe passage across increasingly complex crossings to access public transport stops, employment and services. We also look at the requirement for braille and tactile signage so that individuals who are blind or vision impaired can access the same information provided by traditional signage, which helps us find our way from point A to point B without the reliance on technology. And finally, we'll examine wayfinding measures such as contrast, lighting, tactile elements, acoustics, comfort zones and barrier-free footpaths which enable independent and graceful movement. I would like to take this opportunity to thank our senior management team for championing the work of the Possibility Lab and also NCBI's Access Ambassadors who walk alongside us in our day-to-day work, setting a standard which will drive forward inclusive design in the built environment and lead to total mobility outcomes in years to come. If you'd like further access advice or to download the position statements that I've been talking about, please go to the Possibility Lab webpage or contact us directly on hello@possibilitylab.ie. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chantelle. So folks, I'm conscious of time and we want to keep going here. So it is time, as I said from the outset, for our Change This Space panel. And I want to introduce you to our participants. First up, and she's just standing on my right or your left, online is Bobby Hickey. Bobby is currently a policy executive at IBEC. In 2021, Bobby was the Vice President for Diversity and Inclusion for DCU Students' Union after completing her bachelor's degree in comms at DCU. Bobby is an NCBI service user and has supported us with various access awareness events. And Bobby is also our moderator today. On the panel, we are joined by Rob Tobin, who's an access consultant with NCBI, an architect by profession. Rob works to promote best practice in accessibility and inclusive design, public procurement and project governance. Rob's portfolio of completed projects spans a range of environments and building topologies for clients in the private, public and voluntary sector in Ireland, the UK, Europe and indeed Asia. Edith Toomey, at 10 years of age and our youngest panellist by some distance, is also joining us. Edith has recently moved audiences at the Walk 21 conference, sharing her own experiences walking in Dublin and challenges that come with navigating as a cane user. And last but not least, we have Jade McCormack, who has lived her whole life with low vision. Mum to an active 3-year-old daughter, Jade has never let sight loss get in the way of living a fulfilling life. Passionate about access, Jade is always advocating for people with disabilities to ensure equity when it comes to quality of life. So Bobby, I might just ask you to pop over to the lectern. Keep coming. Okay, right here. Okay, and Bobby is joined by Josie.
Come on. Good girl.
Good girl, okay.
Hi everyone, thank you NCBI for having me. I'm really delighted to be here. I'll just apologise, I'm going to be reading off the questions from my phone, so forgive me for that. So our first question is for Jade. So Jade, can you tell me a little bit about what tools you might use to plan your journey when you're on holidays or in an unfamiliar area?
Sure. So for me, the tools that I would use would be a lot of apps on my phone or information given to me by people who have previously been in a particular place. But for me, it's external maps, new things such as Soundscape, which is life-changing, and apps like Journey Plan or Move It as well are very handy.
And when you're planning a journey in Dublin or a more regional journey outside of Dublin, does the journey planning change at all for you, or is the process similar for both?
It's fairly similar. The only thing is if you're going abroad, you need to just kind of make sure that if there's apps that's specific to that country, that you can access them and be aware of them.
Sure. Okay, brilliant. And our next question is for Edith. So Edith, could you tell us a little bit about how your long cane helps you?
Well, yeah, I could. So basically, I live around like kind of a busy street, I'm gonna say, and this like people will leave their bins out like right in the middle of the road, and then like the bins could like fall over, or the bin man could leave it in the middle of the road, and then like I won't be able to see what's happening. So I would like this would like bump into it basically, and then I'd know, oh, there's something there, I have to go around it. Like they only started giving canes to kids like a few years ago, so yeah, so it's a new thing, and it's definitely great for kids with my I don't know what to say here.
It's okay, don't worry about it.
Kids who need help like me, it's definitely great for them.
Yeah, I'd say it does. And can you give us an example of some things that you might have picked, like that your cane might detect for you? Like, is there anything really odd that you found with your cane or that your cane has saved you from bumping into before?
It was a good few years ago. I don't like cobblestones with it though. Cobblestones are like the worst thing ever. Mm-hmm. But this random thing, this person had like 3 bins, right? And they had like them, my dad probably won't remember this, but like they had them like lined up like a little opera thing. And I didn't see them because I was like playing a game with my friends, I believe. Yeah, I think I was, because my friends were over. And then the bins, like we didn't see the bins, and I didn't hear my friend saying, oh, Edith, there's bins there. And I had been told to bring this out with me just to like help me, and I felt the bins and I was like, okay, I'll just not go near these bins.
Yeah, I know from personal experience, bin day is like an obstacle course day if you're a cane user or a guide dog user for sure. So I'm wondering, Rob, can you give us an idea of how you might use kind of landmarks or clues to navigate the world at all when you're walking around?
Sure, yeah. There are different design features that can serve to promote independent navigation in the public realm in our built environment. Tactile paving is one of those which we're all very familiar with, that sensory information that you feel underfoot or you detect with your cane as you're travelling along. Also auditory cues or audible design features. For instance, at the front of NCBI's head office, we've got a water fountain that service users can hear as they travel along Whitworth Road. So picking up on something that you can hear serves as a landmark, tells you where you are in space as you're navigating the city. It could be also the smell of something. If you have landscaped areas where certain flowers or plants are growing, you might smell the lavender or the roses or whatever it was at certain times of year that would tell you, I'm coming up to the main square now, or High Street, or wherever that happens to be. So you can design for the senses in different ways.
And just going back to tactile paving, how would one use that? Excuse me, sorry. How would one use that for safety reasons when they're out travelling?
So there are different types of tactile paving. One that we see at pedestrian crossings is the blister type, and depending on whether or not that crossing has traffic signals, it could be red or a buff-coloured tactile blister paving. Also around level changes, stairs, we use corduroy paving. If you go to tram stops or train stations, you'll see different formats of tactile paving used in those settings, and they all tell different things about the environment and the hazards or the obstacles that might be there in those environments.
Thanks so much. And then Jade, could you let us know how important it is to have a wide selection of wayfinding measures available and the different types that might be around if you're using a long cane or a guide dog?
Sure. So especially in the built environment, it's important to have as many as possible available to you, such as Rob said, the corduroy paving, especially if you're walking along Grafton Street, you might find it, and that's particularly helpful to keep you kind of on a straight line so you're not in the middle of the street. And then there's high contrasting paving and the blister paving, and as well certain curbs, like if they're too high, they can pose a safety risk. So that's another important thing for me.
Thanks so much. And Rob, we've spoken a lot about tactile measures that are put in place and things about accessibility in that way, but I'm wondering how we can design a more accessible for all and not just visually impaired environment. How can we be more conscious of that going forward in our designs?
I think it's important to design for at least two senses. So for someone who has sensory loss, be it a loss of hearing, you could have haptic information or vibrating features, or indeed visual. So the walk, don't walk at a pedestrian crossing, that green man. That can be useful for someone who has a hearing impairment. For someone with sight loss, it could be audible and tactile cues. So we touched on the fountain. There's also the audible pedestrian signals for people who are blind and vision impaired. And so there's different ways, but I would recommend to design for at least two senses.
Perfect. And is there anywhere that listeners or viewers can find any documents that kind of go into the specifications of wayfinding measures that are already in place?
Yeah, we've got a few really good guidance documents and standards have come out in recent years. For design of signage, we would look to the Sign Design Society's Sign Design Guide, which I think is about 4 years old, 2018 I think that was published in. And that gives recommendations around tactile information, both raised lettering and Braille, the use of Braille in signage to promote independent wayfinding. There is the new European standard for accessibility and usability of the built environment, and that sets out the functional requirements for access measures in a wide range of built environment settings. It's not prescriptive at a local level. That's left for new national standards that will hopefully come along and be developed there. But it explains why access measures are needed on a Europe-wide basis. So it's great that there's that consistent best practice guidance now for all of Europe. Just one final one, when we talk about tactile paving, the UK Department for Transport published a new guidance on the use of tactile paving surfaces document. It came out I think around November or December of last year, and we would refer to that because it captures all the main types of tactile paving products that we see used in Ireland as well.
Brilliant, and it's brilliant that all those resources are so readily available. So we'd encourage all of our viewers and listeners to go and take advantage of that for sure. Just circling back to Braille and how it can affect independent travel, Edith, can you give us an example of how you found Braille in your community and how it made you feel?
Well, I've been using Braille for a long time now. I am in 4th now, and I've been using Braille since I was in junior infants, and it definitely has helped me a lot. I recently did this thing in my school where it was like World Sight Day, and I brailled everyone in the school's name in Braille, and I gave it to them. And it just reminded me of like when I first started Braille, I had no idea what this was, and I've just come such a long way from it. It's just incredible that like I can read those little dots on the page. It just seems impossible, but like when you get down to it, it's kind of, you know, like once you learn what you're doing, it can be really easy, but like it's really astonishing to know that you can read like little dots on a page.
It's absolutely incredible, and speaking from experience, I've tried to learn Braille and it's a whole other language, so fair play for mastering it. Jade, I'm wondering, what kind of physical signage do you find helpful?
For me, it's both Braille and tactile, so especially in places like elevators where you have numbers to press. If they're both raised or in Braille, that's very, very helpful. Or if you're trying to find a bathroom, if there's tactile or Braille signage, that's, again, useful. It's just, as long as they're working kind of together, it's very helpful.
Absolutely. And I'm wondering, can you give us an example of how accessible signage might help you? It seems kind of like a straightforward thing, but I suppose for people that might not have ever used accessible signage or might walk past it because they're able to read the usual signage, what little things does it help you with when you're out and about?
So for example, if you come to the top of the stairs and there's a map, if there's a tactile sign that says, you know, say ophthalmologist or whatever, and there's the arrow, if that's written in Braille where you can feel it, or if it's in tactile, then you kind of know, you follow the arrow, you're heading in the right direction. Or again, especially as in my introduction, I have a very active 3-year-old, and finding the proper bathroom is also very beneficial.
Perfect. And Rob, I'm wondering how effective APS is, and are there changes that have been implemented recently to affect APS at all?
Audible pedestrian signals, APS, are those units that you see attached to pedestrian crossings, and some of them are tactile and haptic. So there's a vibrating plate in the unit that will tell you when to cross or not, when to cross the road or not cross the road, depending on what way the signals are. They also include an audible signal, as the name suggests, so that the unit is telling you, again, when it's safe to cross or not, depending on the tone and the pulse of that sound that it's emitting. It's very important that the volume of those is adjusted to ensure people can cross the road safely, and that they can hear the beacon on the other side, or the unit on the other side of the crossing that's guiding them, because otherwise there's a risk that they might stray as they're crossing the road. So it's important that APS is installed and maintained so that it's functional for everyone.
Certainly. And Jade, we're wondering, is there any additional kind of awareness or any additional thought that you need to put into travelling with your daughter at the moment?
So yeah, like if there's road works going on, if they're not barriered properly, that's a consideration. Again, if the audible signals on traffic lights are not working or they're not switched on or anything, that will really hinder getting across the road safely. Things like certain traffic lights, especially in Dublin, some of them have a tactile map at the side of the unit. They're very helpful to tell you then, you go straight across, or if there's an island crossing in the middle. But some of the units don't have them, so where I can find them, they're very helpful.
Absolutely. And Rob, we're wondering, can you highlight some benefits to APS or the tactile crossings that can benefit service users when they're travelling?
Definitely, yeah. That information that the APS is giving you at the point of crossing about whether or not it's safe to cross, that is very useful. It empowers people to cross the road safely by themselves, independently and safely. That information in the form of visual cues at the crossing, tactile or haptic cues, and audible cues is designing for all the senses. It's incredibly valuable and useful.
Absolutely. Well, this is definitely an ever-changing space, but it's great to see that it's getting attention and there's so many people watching at the moment. So that's all the questions that I have. So thank you so much to my panelists. I'm going to get my guide dog who's having a nap on the floor beside me, and I'll hand back over to Aaron. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Bobby. Chantelle's going to give you a guide.
Yeah, sorry.
So now you know we're really live. And look, it's great. I think we've got a huge amount of questions online as well, and the panel have been brilliant. I might just ask, and looking at the time here, one quick question, maybe to Jade, not to put you on the spot, Jade. What are your thoughts on, look, I can put it to everybody, what are your thoughts on promoting and delivering sighted guide training to the public, in particular shops and businesses in the community, so that it becomes something that's done every day or a skill that's performed every day, in line with something like first aid, for example? What are your thoughts on that, Jade?
Personally, for me, I would love to see every public service sector, every shop or cafe or whatever it is, that everyone has sighted guide training, because it's so invaluable. And it makes a huge difference when people know how to properly sighted guide.
Rob?
Yeah, I agree with what Jade said. For every venue that someone who's blind or vision impaired could possibly walk into, to have the facility for someone to guide them through that space and to inform them of, well, we've got a door coming up or we're going to go up the stairs. It should be everywhere.
It's common sense. It's common sense.
Yeah.
And to clearly our most relaxed panelist of the day, Edith, what about you? Do you think it would be helpful for people who are working in local shops and businesses to know how to support you or to approach you if you needed help, that is?
I definitely think that should be a thing. I definitely think that is going to be helpful for people. I definitely think that is a great idea, and thank you for bringing it up.
No problem, wasn't me, it was a viewer. Guys, the good news is you're going to get a little bit of time back on your day. I might just go back to the panel maybe for one word just to sum up the day, to sum up Change This Space. Jade?
Inspiring.
Inspiring. Rob?
You've put me on the spot, Aaron.
I said I was going to put you on the spot.
or the audience has put me on the spot. Inclusive.
Inclusive. Okay. What about you, Edith?
Do you want me to say a word that?
Yeah. Did you have fun?
Yes.
That's good. We'll take that.
I think help should be. I don't know. Just say yes.
Helpful.
Say
Helpful.
Yeah.
No, helpful.
Yeah.
So we have inspiring, inclusive, and helpful. And that's exactly what we were looking for. And guys, Caroline and Bobby and Edith and Jade are just really 4 rare gems that are here today, I guess, from 55,000 blind and vision impaired people who are aspiring to bring a new approach. And as you heard in today's presentations, a new approach to the status quo. And I think deep down, with our collective efforts and with a possibility mindset, we can reimagine a country without barriers or a life without limits. And as we sign off here today, I just want to ask everyone on the call today, and indeed everyone here in the room, what your possibility could be and how we can shape a more inclusive country with and for people who are blind and vision impaired. So I want to thank all our panelists, and I want to thank everyone who has joined us online today, and really for your ongoing consideration as we move forward in our quest to change this space. Thanks so much.